Welcome to Confessions of a Cyberpsychologist. I am Carolyn Freeman, and today I am chatting with Louise O'Day about the interconnectedness of the social sciences and computing. Louise is currently undertaking graduate research in cyberpsychology at Norfolk State University. Her forthcoming publication is titled Social Science in AI Research and Development, Interdisciplinary Needs versus Hiring Realities. And she previously worked at Google for 6.5 years on Google Marketing and Business Solutions. Welcome, Louise. I'm so delighted to have you on board.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Louise, before we get chatting about the research and work you do, can you tell me a little bit more about who you are, what you do kind of currently, and what the pivot point was that sent you down the road of cyberpsychology?
I'm going to start kind of young just because I think it's informative to where I am now. And I'm going to skip some of the stuff in the middle that maybe isn't so related. But so I just finished my degree in cyberpsychology, a master's degree, as you said, from Norfolk State University. And I finished that up at the beginning of this year. And I just wrapped up having my master's thesis presented internationally, which was so exciting and a lifelong dream. And so kind of what got me there was this beginning start in tech, even as a very young person. As a teenager, I was interested in it. I think that tech is kind of never the same thing twice, and I really like that. I started in tech as a teenager. I was a supervisor at a video game store, and it just always kind of interested me. But I think an important piece that I'm sharing to sort of reference back to the research piece is that I actually grew up on a city block in Flint, Michigan, and my family wasn't, we just didn't have access to a lot. So my family didn't have internet until I was 17. And in that age, everyone was online. Like everyone had a MySpace, a Facebook, like they were on AIM every night. They were like kind of socialization had gone digital, and I didn't have access to that in that formative kind of stage. So I became kind of an observer. Like I became a student really of like technology and the internet. And I really took that perspective. Like I always have carried that perspective of like, I'm sort of watching from the outside. And even when I did have access, even when I, started working at a video game store, and then eventually I was fixing computers to put myself through college. I just always had that perspective. It was just baked in because that was really how I was introduced to it. And so, like I said, I was fixing computers, put myself through undergrad. I got a business degree in international business. And then right out of college, I started working at Google. So really came out swinging as far as my interest in technology goes. And then throughout my corporate career, I would say, again, I just kind of held that perspective of like, observing the way people are behaving, observing the way people are interacting. And I think that made me really, I think it brought a really valuable perspective. And that was sort of one of my own keys to success in the industry. And then for me, when I think about my path to research, I'm like, oh, this makes perfect sense. Like I've always been observing. And I think that's a big piece of what research is observation and being able to sort of like pick a different perspective or dive deeper into something. So I'd say that was like kind of my path and kind of my perspective since I was very young.
So you've kind of been a cyber psychologist before you even knew what the word meant or what the word even existed.
Right? Yeah. Well before. I was sort of just always peering in, trying to figure out like these changes and how they're impacting, my life and everybody else's around me, and where do I fit in that? Where do other people fit? Yeah, kind of since I was a teenager.
That is amazing, though, that for your generation, that you weren't exposed to technology like your peers were, and being able to look at it from a different perspective rather than being entrenched in it and not really thinking it through.
Yeah, it was. I was I was such a big reader. Because we didn't have internet, I just read so much. So I was at the library a lot, and I have memories of like knowing that I wanted to participate, in these like, because my friends would be like on AIM at night after school, and I would like occasionally at the library like log in to chat with them or like post on a Facebook wall. But yeah, I did have just a different experience of like maybe being like in that bubble of like reading almost for me. Like that's how I entertained myself for just a little bit longer. I will say that that did once we got internet, once I was fully sort of introduced, I was immersed just like my peers. But I do think those few extra years that I was kind of outside of it, they were important. They were important in shaping the way I interact and view things and just generally my own participation. I think I have a little bit, I have one extra step of like thought when I am engaging in digital spaces.
And that also just makes me remember that, or think about, there's a number of people who I chat to who give their children a smartphone at like age 2 or an iPad at age 4 and say, well, I have to do it because they have to keep on top of technology and be ahead of their peers and not be left behind. Whereas actually you have proved that that is not necessarily the case, that you don't have to be immersed in technology at the age of 4 in order to be able to do something like product development.
That is true. I don't know if I am an anomaly or what. I certainly, I will say that my view of when I was finally exposed to it, I was very aware that I would have to like make up the gap, right? Like I understood that there was kind of a skill set that I was lacking, which actually influenced my decision to be a computer consultant to put myself through college. I was just like, well, I need to learn this skill and I want to be competitive. But I happen to agree with what you're saying. I don't I I'm not a fan of giving children, you know, if you can help it, but I don't think that it's like a totally necessary thing. And I think people will grasp it. I was certainly able to grasp it so easily, and literally my first job out of college was Google. So
So talking about Google, you worked at the forefront of product development within Google for a number of years. Could you
yeah,
talk a little bit more about the type of work you were involved in, and kind of what you
sure.
noticed about AI and technology and how it was changing what work looks like for the average office worker?
Yeah, so I actually started in Google. I started in sales and marketing, and I very quickly knew that I wanted to sort of go back to the support product side. And so that's exactly what I did. After about a year and a half, I moved to Colorado and I was working on the product support side. And really what a lot of that job was managing this global support strategy for emerging products. What it turned into for me was um, centering a lot around betas. And at the time, I was just really lucky. Like I said, I like the thing I like about technology is that you're rarely doing the same thing twice. And so I was very drawn to betas because everything is just like, pardon my French, but a shit show. Like nothing, you're not gonna be able to really like figure anything out. Like you're kind of just
And the question I have is, what is a beta?
so a beta is in technology, it's a product that is they're trying to develop it. So it's not in its final form yet. So there's various names for the life cycle, the stages of the life cycle, alpha, beta, and then eventually you'd get like a full launch down the road. But it's sort of like that first version of like, think about when um, ChatGPT came out, there would have been an alpha and a beta version of these that are just like, there's so many problems with it. Like maybe it's not doing what you want it to do, and you're really training it. You're testing it out. You're making sure all the like buggy features get worked out. That was a lot of what I was doing on the support side. And really, what I noticed in that role was that more and more, especially because I was on the front of betas, our jobs were we're shifting towards, instead of us being focused on like the development or the support, we really were becoming automators. And that became very, very clear to me kind of towards the end of my tenure at Google. I was put on a project to redefine the scope of the role for the whole team. And one of the proposed changes was to actually include engineer in our title. And that was kind of like, I was like, oh, yeah, the thing that I think is happening is totally happening. And that really was like a huge part of my job. Like a huge part of my job, what I was incentivized to be doing was to be obviating things, automating things. And even the product itself was AI. It was really one of the first like AI focused advertising campaigns, and it has become a very successful advertising campaign within the Google sphere. It still is out there and exists under a different name, but yeah, I kind of saw that change happening years before, and then really, I think that was the stamp for me that I was like, yep, I am observing this correctly.
And that's starting to now roll out, isn't it, in terms of jobs, especially white collar workers or knowledge worker roles are kind of being automated. What do
For
you,
sure.
because you spoke about you kind of are become the engineer and the roles becoming automated. What do you mean by it becoming automated?
So for me, the thing that I was noticing was that it was less about my interactions with like even like just interactions with people, right? It was really less about that and more about efficiency and kind of correctness, precision. So I was always measured on a thing called quality, which was like the accuracy of my ability to solve a problem essentially. And more what I was realizing was that I was like, oh, most of the humanness of my specific role, which was in a product support space, it was just less and less, and more, it was automation, which was interesting.
So kind of less human, more machine focus.
Definitely.
And during our initial chat, you were talking about someone else who you knew that worked at Google that was kind of in a slightly more creative role, and they started feeling that a couple of years after you.
Yeah. So as it happens when you're at a big corporate tech company, there's a lot of moving around internally. And so if you're there for long enough, you'll know people just on such interesting different teams that you keep up with through the years. And one of my good friends was on a team related to augmented reality. And I actually quit Google a few years before this friend. And I remember when I was quitting, I was kind of, saying, here's the experience that I'm having. Um, and what I want to do is kind of step away because I'm kind of seeing the way that this is evolving and I want to see the bigger picture of it. And she was not having that experience because she was on a different team that was a little bit more like insulated, more in the bubble of kind of protecting the creativity, like the human creativity of it. And I do think like eventually that that automation, that obviation, that push for machine over human, it did eventually funnel up to those teams and really affect the whole company. But that definitely has also been my observation is that usually it's the people who are kind of at the front lines, which I would say I was because I was directly, sometimes, not all the time, interacting with like clients who were paying Google. And so I was seeing those cracks first, or those changes, I should say.
And that's now starting to roll out into the general public domain of work. So it's kind of starting to filter out. And I'm assuming that a lot of the more mechanical roles that are like data analysis and number crunching are being affected slightly earlier than other roles like, say, advertising or marketing, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think it's probably both. I think anything that can be automated um, will be automated. Has been obviously like I was in the advertising space to some extent. Um, and yeah, I do think that it will affect primary, like first and foremost, it will be like blue, white collar workers. Um, because anything where you can save a buck or two, if there's a machine that can help you do it, then it's probably going to happen.
I think that's the thing is if it can save a buck or two, if you can
Yep,
automate, if you can increase productivity and reduce the staff count, because that's really where the biggest amount of bottom line spend is
for
on
sure.
your staff. So if you can reduce that massively and increase productivity, that's a win for shareholders, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I think especially too, just to add, definitely in the tech space, a big reason for that is the need for the amount of investment to just be developing AI is so great, right? You need so much capital to be doing this, that you kind of have to cut somewhere, and where you can cut might be like your workforce if you can automate some of that. So I'm not saying that I necessarily like agree with that approach, but that just is what it is.
It is what it is, and that's kind
Hmm.
of capitalist mindset, isn't it? Generally,
Very
is
much so,
it's about making money and bottom line, increasing value for shareholders. So, got to
for
do what you
sure.
got to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. First on the scene is really like what they're after.
And you spoke during our initial chat about your fascination with the social sciences side of technology. Could you talk a little bit more about this?
So when I began my research, I would say I spent a good chunk of the time in my literature review exploring really the beginnings of computing and artificial intelligence and where the intersection of this topic was with the social sciences. Really what I wanted to know was like where is the social science like placed in this, if at all? And what I found was that they were so heavily intertwined. Um, Back to like Alan Turing's work or Simon and Newell. McCarthy mentions this, who's the godfather of AI. All really of these pioneers of computing and AI, they pretty clearly say in their work and in their research that their goal is to like just attempt to be as good at humans as be as good as humans are when like solving problems, and that is repeated throughout like the research, all of the different research articles I would read or the books. That was kind of the common theme that I was seeing, was that each and every one of these pioneers were saying, we're really just trying to mimic as best we can the way humans solve problems, the way they're able to like um, have a bunch of options and then choose the correct one or choose the incorrect one and learn from that. So they're really trying to mimic this very human process of solving problems, of reasoning. So it's not just this like overarching theme of intelligence, it's all of the different parts of it. And it was so interdisciplinary. Like Simon was a Nobel laureate and he won these like incredible accolades across disciplines. It wasn't just computing, it was psychology and sociology. And he laid the foundation for what we now today know as cognitive psychology, which I believe was like information processing back in like the 50s, 60s. But yeah, the intersection is just it's undeniable. And even McCarthy, who's a bit more recent, um, he wrote in his research often about the need for interdisciplinary research, especially in like philosophy and really understanding like how humans think, because that's really at the core of what we're trying to do with this technology.
Because it comes back to really trying to replicate human intelligence or the
Yes.
original kind of reasoning behind doing the artificial intelligence, because it's kind of, yeah, how do humans think and how can we replicate them in a machine format?
Certainly, yeah, and I think it's what I think they did really well is even get a little deeper into what specifically about human intelligence is so like special and needing like what are they exactly trying to replicate? And like I said, a lot of it is like how humans reason, how we learn from experiences, all of these different pieces that are just so human. Like they're pulling it from us and just doing their best to try to have like a thread of that in computing and artificial intelligence.
But that focus seems to really have changed and be captured by mathematics and algorithms, because you spoke about this in an initial chat. Um, can you talk more about that in terms of that disconnect now with the original aims that Turing, McCarthy, um, Simon and Newell were originally envisioning back in the mid 1900s?
So one of the things that I mentioned in my research is there is a measurable shift away from research that was focused in academic sources and now is primarily focused in like corporate spaces. So think like back in the, a couple of decades ago, back in the 50s, 60s, a lot of the research was academic, which meant that it was primarily interdisciplinary too. No, I shouldn't say primarily. It was more interdisciplinary. And through the decades, that has shifted pretty drastically. So not only have we seen a shift away from interdisciplinary research and more towards just like physics or like mathematics and just computing, we've also seen a shift away from academic sources into corporate institutions. So think Google, Anthropic, Microsoft. So a lot of the research we see now is coming from these like very corporate sources instead of what there's always going to be limitations of research, but there is a benefit to having like the purity of academic research, right, without any kind of corporate like pressure or incentive. And we've really seen that shift. And in my paper, I want to say it's Dr. Morgan Frank, who I pull his research to cite that, because he was able to go back and look at all of the research and say like, look at this shift that we've seen away from interdisciplinary research and away from academic sources. And I think that's really telling, like that kind of tells the story of the direction that AI and computing research has gone.
And considering where it was originally in terms of replicating human intelligence, you could kind of understand it. It's kind of understand how it's called artificial intelligence, but we've kind of take on human attributes to describe artificial intelligence, and we've what they call anthropomorphizing. So giving these technical processes human names and human behavior or terminology. And we use that to describe the product itself, but I wonder how that actually impacts how we consider products like therapy bots and chat bots and companion bots and even artificial intelligence. How do you think the way that we describe or give attributes to artificial intelligence actually changes how we think about or engage with AI?
That is such an interesting question, and one that I have been thinking about. I've actually asked some of my therapist friends about this, because there's been a growing body of research, right, about like how chatbots affect like our brains and like what areas of our brains light up and like how it affects the amygdala and all this stuff. And I have my own theories about this, but I do think that one area that I look at a lot in terms of like comparison is social media, because I think, to me, when social media happened, like we just had no way to know how it was going to affect our society. And that's a little bit how I would say I feel about AI in terms of like this like really rapid integration into our lives and the way people are using it, the way it's so personal, the way people are just like disclosing so much information. We just have no way of really knowing how that's going to affect so many aspects. My biggest concern, I think, is the social part of it. Like, I think the anthropomorphizing of these chatbots, I've read different research and I've listened to different experts talk about how like it's like similarly in social media, there's like this mechanism that happens in your brain, right? Where like we're humans, we're social, we're like wired for connection. And because so much of that connection it begins online, right? Like you're texting someone to hang out with them. You're not going next door anymore. Like when I was a kid and I wanted to like play with a friend, like I went and I knocked on their door. I was face to face with them. But now I'm gonna text a friend like, hey, what are you up to? And I think one thing that happens that I know has been researched is that it's not the same. Like that digital connection, it does not scratch the itch. It just doesn't. Like it's like, I don't know, it's like fake meat. Like it's something that is like it's close, like you're getting around the right area, but you're really not scratching the itch. And that is my thought when it comes to chatbots, is like my biggest area of interest maybe is the social impact, because I think a lot of people are using chatbots. Like there's a lot of invisible uses, right? Like, and I could talk about all of that, but what is very pressing to me is like how is this going to affect people socially in a similar way that I think social media has affected people socially? They think it's kind of scratching the social itch or the connection itch, and it's really not. And I think because of the way these things are developed to really draw you in, and especially chatbots are aimed to validate you. Like, if you've ever used a chatbot to be like, hey, I'm having a rough day, like, it is going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. And guess what? Your best friend isn't. Your best friend knows all your flaws, and they're going to be like, actually, no, you need to get outside and touch grass, or like maybe go, take a walk or something. And I think that's sort of where I am most interested, is um, how it will affect people socially, and then also like what tools do we have to like help people, I guess, because it is coming, like can't stop the train, but how can we make the train safer, I guess, is my approach generally to things like this, is like, when is it good to use, and when do we need to be like, okay, maybe if you're going through a breakup and you're really struggling, ChatGPT is like, let's log off for like a month, go chat with your friends. We can use this later down the line when you've got like maybe a solid base of like, I don't know, processing feelings.
I think going back to your friend example, I think a lot of friends would either say to us, get over yourself, or
Yeah.
you need to see someone professionally, or come on now,
Yeah.
this is enough already. So there's a lot more of honesty
Yes.
in that communication, rather than, oh, poor you. Oh, yes, I reaffirm everything you're going through. So there is an element of humanness that we're lacking with chatbots. And I think
For
my
sure.
personal opinion is that with us giving AI or chatbots human type characteristics or names, that name behavior or name characteristics, means that we automatically think it's human, and we
Yeah.
automatically associate with another person, and it's not the same. It's not the same relationship.
Yeah, I think probably the word that I um, am describing is just loneliness. I think that is my fear, maybe not fear necessarily, but that is what I'm like interested in observing, is how we're already seeing like this influx of people who are becoming more and more lonely because we're kind of more and more disconnected. And to me, when you have that loop, right, where something is like designed to make you feel like it's human, and so then you're interacting with it as if it's human, and it's really not scratching that itch. You are in this sort of cyclical thing of like, I'm trying, and I'm still like in this loop of feeling disconnected, I guess.
But I also wonder sometimes if social media has actually trained us to engage with AI in a very different way. Because I'd see your point about it being similar to social media in terms of the lack of solid relationships and that real strong engagement that we get with face to face. But I wonder if we hadn't had social media, if we would have engaged with AI in the same way. I think it would have been very different if we'd not had social media before. I think so. To sum that up, I think social media has trained us in very specific behaviors around engaging with a someone else who I know in real life, but also know online. So it's made me very kind of online, offline fluid. Is there a word to describe that?
Yeah, I know what you're describing, and I agree. I think immediately what I think of is like there's like a little bit of cognitive dissonance happening, right? Like, we're aware of the dangers usually of like, even when you're logging into something and you're consenting for like cookies or whatever, no one's reading that. But if you were to ask someone like, do you care about your data or your privacy? They're gonna say yes, but like they kind of don't. And I think it's kind of similar here, right? It's like, are you a person who like wants connection, who like wants these things, who was trying to, facilitate like healthy, I don't know, social spheres. And certainly technology can be part of that. And without realizing, you're kind of not. And to be honest, like social media is designed to do that. Like it is designed on algorithms that are like a slot machine. And that's just kind of the way it goes. And I would say AI, from a psychology standpoint, when you think about a chatbot and the way it's going to validate you specifically, it is learning you. It is like a mirror back to you. I think it's a strong pull. I know few people who aren't who don't have moments where they're like very susceptible to that, right? Of someone really validating the fullness of their experience, which is really just so rare because humans are flawed and like we don't see all things. We just can't we can never know fully how you know how the whole interaction is going because there's multiple factors, and AI doesn't can't take that into account.
Absolutely. I also think it's a very Western thing because I think that it is a very individualistic cultural thing because I would suspect that in cultures where it's very much community based, there is less of this self affirmation, this need to be constantly reassured of who I am. I think because they get
Hmm.
so much feedback from others in their
Yeah,
community and very much about where others are and my place in that community, you've got a real sense of who you are in terms of where you stand. Whereas in our individualistic society, we have a very much, well, it's all about me and
true.
who am I and where do I stand and what do I stand for? So I need this kind of constant reassurance that I'm okay and I exist and I'm meant to be here and all that kind of stuff. So I wonder if AI in some ways capitalizes on that.
Oh, I think so. I think I think it definitely, if you tend at all toward any type of like neuroses, which like we all have a healthy amount, right? Like a certain level of neuroticism is like normal and fine and necessary to like function. But I think if you are anywhere even like above, I don't know, I think that to me is like the pull of these chatbots. And again, I'm using chatbots so specifically like in the discussion about AI, but I think to me it's the most relevant about what most everyone can touch and see and what is tangible. And yeah, I think I think that's what it kind of I think you're absolutely right. And I would be curious to know like how this functions in a more collectivist society versus individualist, because I think you're right.
I'm making huge assumptions, but that's my guess. Is
Right.
it's a real Western issue in terms of having such a dependency on chatbots and therapy bots. Um, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Something for someone to research somewhere.
I'm sure
Um,
they are, and I will read that research when it
yes,
comes out.
indeed. Please share. Uh, so, talking about research, I just want to dive a bit more into the research that you've recently done and actually was
Yes.
presented on your behalf at the CyberPsychology conference in Sydney. And it's titled Hiring Practices in AI Research and Development, assessing, assessing the extent to which companies value social science expertise. Oh, that was a long
Mouthful.
title, but it
Yeah.
sounds fantastic. So, firstly, what got you interested in the research and what were your top line findings?
Sure. So, really, I think what got me interested in the research was a little bit of inspiration from my time at Google. I really had a desire. I felt that there was like a shift happening, and I wanted to sort of step back and see the full picture because I felt like I was so niche in like this one space. And what's so, what's funny, I think, about this research, I'll give you the research questions after I explain, but I think what's interesting about this research is when I explain the premise to anyone from tech, where I say like, I really wanted to see if these big tech companies were hiring social scientists. Like that was kind of like the initial question I had. Basically, like anyone that I talk to who's had experience in corporate tech or tech of any kind is they know, like they understand that social scientists are not being hired for these types of roles of like responsible AI development or research or ethical AI. And I also knew that intuitively, right? Like that was my intuitive guess. But as I began my research degree, I realized the importance of every known thing that we have now, everything that seems so obvious to us was once unknown or was once just like a hypothetical or a theory. And we thought, like, yeah, I think so. And science is what made it so, right? Like we measured it, or we studied it, or we created research that verified what we thought. And so that was really my inspiration here, was that I was like, I have a hunch that this is what's happening. It seems obvious to me, but maybe I'm wrong, and I would love to be wrong. And I really wanted to like figure it out. I wanted to know if what I thought was correct was correct. And so my research questions, which I will read them exactly. The first one was, do job titles and descriptions for AI roles indicate a need for social science expertise? That was research question one. And then my second research question was, are there observable discrepancies between job titles, descriptions, and required qualifications for social science related job postings in AI? So first I wanted to see like, are there job postings that are related to social science, right, in some way? And then if there are they hiring a social scientist for these roles?
So the question is, from my side, what were the results of your research?
Sure. I looked at basically 8 of the main companies. So think Anthropic, Microsoft, OpenAI. And I was very specific. I wanted to, especially since it was exploratory, right? This is like the first of its kind. Like this data, this research doesn't exist out there. So I wanted to look at only the research and development related roles. And I did it in a very specific time frame. This was at the end of 2024. And what I found were 144 roles total that had to do with AI research and development during this time frame on these 8 websites. Of those 144 roles, 72 or 76 roles rather were applicable. So about half of the roles. And then within those roles, so that would be those were the only roles that were considered applicable to the data set. So I took those roles and I said, how many of these roles are hiring a social scientist? Basically, like, are they hiring a social scientist or are they hiring a computer scientist? And 89%, so nearly 90%, were hiring computer scientists, or were explicitly asking for a technical skill set, something like Python, or something that a computer scientist or like an engineer would typically have that a social scientist is unlikely to have had based on their research or based on their learning, schooling degree.
So I'm assuming from those job titles versus what the requirements were for the job, that the majority of those job postings were for technical people who needed social science background of some sort. And even though the role needed a social scientist, they weren't hiring a social scientist.
That's such a good question. I don't know. I think that's really what interested me in the whole thing, is that my my observation of a lot of the challenges that I see in artificial intelligence seem to be very in this space of social science, right? They're like typically in this like Venn diagram of like moral, ethical, societal impacts or problems. And to me, I kind of had the thought of like, who solves those problems? If you step out of AI, who solves those problems? Social scientists. Okay, so then I step into the space of AI, and really what AI is trying to do is like mimic a lot of human intelligence processes. And who is creating that? A computer scientist or an engineer who does not have a background in social science. And so that was kind of the disconnect to me, is like I had a moment where I was like, wait, if you're trying to solve these problems and you are having the same person who does not have a background in any of the social sciences solving the problem, you're going to keep having the same problem over and over because you don't have the correct perspective, or even like a difference of perspective to offer another path or piece of information or anything like that. And actually, I wrote down so that I could give an example of like a few snippets of the job description so you can kind of hear what I was talking about in these roles. So like a few of the OpenAI roles, the description would have something like, and this is verbatim, centering humans by developing mechanisms and interfaces that enable humans to both express their intent and to effectively supervise and control AI. That's one. Another is, even in highly complex situations, align state-of-the-art models with human values and preferences. And so these types of snippets are in these roles, right? And they're saying, here's our objective. Here's what we're trying to create in these AI spaces. And then they're hiring a computer scientist or someone who is like, it's inferred in the skill set that they're listing, right? If they're listing Python, C++, like you're looking for an engineer or a computer scientist. But really these descriptions, I was like, there's a mismatch here. I think there's a little bit of a discrepancy in what you're wanting to create and who you are wanting to create it.
I'm kind of assuming, and this is a massive assumption, that if you're trained in thinking like a mathematician and trained in computer programming, that you don't have the thinking processes that allow you to see it from a human perspective. You see it from a technical data, bits and bytes perspective, and how we can do algorithms and mathematical equations. You don't see it from a how can this algorithm impact a human? Whereas, and the opposite is also probably true, is that as a social scientist, you don't necessarily see the algorithm because you're trained in a very specific way and you're trained to think in a very specific way. So they're trying to find the solution for something that's got the wrong part to fit that solution.
Yeah,
Another way to describe it, it's just
I
like,
know.
it's almost like saying, well, you're thirsty, so I'm going to give you cake.
Yeah, that's actually how I opened the paper. Really, I think, which is so funny because it took me so long to figure out how to open the paper. And then I was like, yeah, I think it's pretty simple. Like, if you're having an ethical dilemma, who are you calling? Is it a computer scientist? Probably not. Like, I'm not calling a computer scientist. Perhaps you are, but that's just not what enters my mind. And so I think that's the interesting part of this is I feel like what you're describing is there is a lack of perspective. Like there are perspectives missing from that room. And that's my personal take on it. And I wanted to see if there was any kind of way I could quantify that, I guess.
Do you think that comes back to the fact that those who run these companies come from a data science background and they don't kind of see where the mismatch is because they just don't have that perspective at all?
That is a good question. I was actually almost an engineer. When I graduated from high school, I got almost a full ride scholarship to be an engineer at like this private engineering school in Michigan. And part of the reason why I was like, I'm not interested is because I was like, I'm bored by these problems. But all that context to say, I have had so many close like peers, friends. I've worked so closely with engineers, and I do think the training of that schooling does there's almost part of the training is a like very black and white. It's maybe like linear, that like there's always an answer to something, and that's how you're approaching solving a problem. Is that it's very mathematical, it's very computational. If you just keep applying, like if you apply a formula, somewhere out there is an answer, and I think that is just not true of human problems. Like there's often not an answer. There's maybe a framework, or there's maybe, a way to think about things. And so I think that's a really good question to ask, like in general, is could it be that at the very top, maybe the type of training that some of the CEOs or some of the leadership have received have sort of led them to believe that if they keep on keeping on in this same way, then maybe this problem will be solved. Um, yeah, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about it like that, but probably.
Possibly. So what do you think the way forward is for those companies who are planning to use kind of AI as part of their recruitment process, or wanting to recruit social scientists and actually not recruiting social scientists, but recruiting someone who does mathematical equations and really good algorithms, but actually doesn't have the skill set? Do you have any advice for these companies?
I'm going to be very straightforward with this one. I don't know. This is the part that um, when I was sort of in the middle of this research, I felt a lot of pressure to also have an answer for that. And I would say, I'm not sure. I think the perspectives needed to be added, but I think that's someone else's expertise, maybe someone who is very like puts teams together or human resources or figuring out how people work together. I think I can present the, hey, maybe consider there's some perspectives missing. Here's that part of it. And I'll let a different expert figure out how to integrate. Actually, um, I believe I don't know if it's the program that you are in, but um, the Portuguese program, there's a Portuguese program in Lisbon. Is this the same one you're in?
No, 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 I'm in Birmingham.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So there is a professor in Portugal who I have worked with and spoken to, and he runs a joint master's program with the social sciences and his engineering cohort, and they work together. And that's like, to me, that's an example of someone who is trying to solve this problem, and he has an engineering background. So he's really coming at this from a computational point of view and trying to figure out how can these two perspectives marry and how can they work together. And I love that. I think it's so interesting. And yeah, I think that's certainly something to figure out.
Indeed. Pat, and I can't never pronounce his last name because it's so epically long, but he's at MIT, and he, during his PhD kind of Viva thingy, had said that every technology company needs a psychologist as part of the team. And I think that is true. And I think that's something that's missing as a psychologist or social scientist at the table amongst technical people. It's not just about someone having technical expertise who also understands social psychology or sociology or psychology or anything in that realm. I think it's about having someone in the team who thinks very specifically about humans and how
Yeah.
humans operate, but not from a behavioral perspective of manipulation, but have you thought of the impact on the human, and how do we make this more ethical for the human and make it more sustainable for humanity?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that is hopefully an opportunity for cyber psychologists in the future.
Yeah, just anyone who specializes in some kind of human behavior. It's like you need
True.
someone at the table, but not just someone in the company, but someone right at the top who is going to challenge the mindsets of thinking in a very specific way about algorithms and impact does this have. I think that's really what's needed, but I think it's going to take a few years before we get to that point where they kind of go, yeah, this is what we need and this is what we have to have. I think there's going to have to be a lot of regulation first before their arm is twisted to think about that.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's part of why I think about a comparison to social media is
Yeah,
just the way tech works is like you're just trying to ship the product as quickly as you can, and then you'll think later about all the, what's the saying, like ask for forgiveness later. Um,
yes, break
kind
stuff
of,
and
yeah,
say sorry afterwards.
yeah.
Yeah. So you're working on a few other research projects at the moment. Are you able to talk about any of these, or are they still work in progress and kind of can't really come out into the open?
They are work in progress, so they aren't formed enough for me to get into the weeds of them, but I am so happy to give an oversight. One, I think that is very, very interesting that the Cyberpsychology Lab at Norfolk State is doing, that Dr. Scott Debb is heading up. We are looking at polarization of political beliefs in the US in regards to social media. So it's exactly what it sounds like, looking at like, is this having an impact? Like, has social media impacted any kind of perception of polarization? And really just looking more closely at that, which I think is interesting to everyone, because I think most people have an opinion on this. And yeah, I would say that to me is that one is very exciting.
That is very exciting because it really does impact every country in the world. There is, and especially with post kind of COVID, there's so many more people who've got very definitive opinions, and it seems that we're separating out so much more in terms of our beliefs. There's
So
not many
much.
people who kind of go down the middle line. It's a lot more not just left or right of center. It's now seriously left or seriously right. So that's a really interesting way to see how social media is actually impacting that, or if it is, or if it's just general, we're discontent with life, so therefore we're just going to become more extreme in our opinions.
Right. Yeah, as like so as the researcher in me is of course like, we're gonna take an unbiased approach. We're gonna see what we find, but the my personal opinion is of course like kind of going back to the same theme that I've repeated with like AI and social media is that I do think there is a bit of like an echo chamber that occurs in these spaces where you are kind of like getting your own perspective validated over and over, regardless of if it's um, accurate or encompassing of what is really truly going on. So even if there's like, what's the saying that's like the best lies have a little bit of truth in them. I feel like you see that a lot in political spaces, right? Like there's some element of like truth to the disinformation or misinformation that can be seen online, and that's really what makes it so compelling. So yeah, from a personal perspective, like I feel that I've observed what you're describing. And I think as a researcher, I'm excited to see if that's true. I'm excited to see what we find.
I'd love you to come back with Dr. Debb and chat about that when you've got the research
For sure.
findings. That'd be so exciting.
I know.
So, Louise, what is the most important question I haven't asked you yet?
I think that maybe the most important question that I think of when I think in terms of this research is why it matters. So that would be a question that I would want to answer. So I'm happy to answer. I'm happy to ask it and answer it. Yeah. So I think the importance of this research is at the core of my motivation was to say how can we um, make AI more like reduce the harm, right? How can we make it as best as it can be? Because it is coming. Like it, we're not going to stop the train. Um, and so I think this kind of research where we're considering its impact and we're considering what voices might be missing from the creation, from the research, from the development side of it is important because that's going to affect the way that artificial intelligence affects society. And a big reason for that is because, when you think about just functionally how a lot of AI works, how the training data works, how these large language models work, they are using internet data from people and they're just kind of like regurgitating it. And it's unfiltered a lot of the times. And that's important to know because that regurgitation is going to also have all of the same biases, all of the same issues, all of the same, you know, blind spots that we have in human society that we need to account for. And that to me is like a big part of this is, well, are we accounting for it? Because we do in real life. In real life, we have social scientists who account for this and who do our best to say, like, hey, here's how bias works. We studied it. Here's what we found. Here's how discrimination works. Here's what we found. And I think it's really important to make sure that that's incorporated into artificial intelligence because we're sourcing from real life. So it's sort of a question of like, well, how are we sourcing? How are we filtering? What lens are we using? What perspectives? How are we can't just let it run wild because we know how that works in real life when it runs wild. And there needs to be like parameters or perspectives in place.
When you said run wild, it kind of reminds me of a wildfire that once it's sparked, if the conditions are right, it becomes rampant and it destroys so much. And unless we have those guardrails in place or fire breaks that actually stop the spread of this fire, it's just going to, as you say, run rampant. And we need those guardrails and we need some kind of something to stop misinformation becoming rampant.
Yes, I agree. And even just knowing what to look for, right? So once you study wildfires and you figure out kind of like the correct um, like environment that those types of things, right? I think that's a good analogy of people who are well versed in wildfire prevention know what to look for and know even before things happen how to like spot potential areas. And I think that's lacking in AI right now. I think what I see more often is like after the fact, we're like, oh, that didn't work. And then it's sort of like, okay, well, what do we do now? And I think my perspective is, well, what are we learning from that? What have we learned from that didn't work? Are we just repeating the same thing and hoping for a different outcome? Um, or are we actually making changes so that we're not just repeating the same thing over and over?
So where do you see the future of cyber psychology going in the realm of AI and kind of the automation of white collar worker roles?
Yeah, I think we touched on this earlier. I think what is I hope to see cyber psychologists getting more involved, maybe on like um, a level of advocacy or being able to understand how this is affecting that population and how we are making sure that this population is not like lost in that change. I come from a long line of blue collar workers of auto industry family members, and that certainly happened in my own family line. And I come from a place where it like devastated a city and devastated like major parts of our state. And so I feel just a personal interest in that of saying like this change is coming. Again, I know I'm such a broken record, but the change is coming. So what are we going to do about it? Like, how can we think ahead of how this might impact these groups, and what that means for them, or if there's like a skill development that needs to happen, or where they're going to be. I think maybe looking ahead and considering how it impacts from like a sociological perspective or an economic perspective, all those things. And I think cyber psychologists can be a really good bridge, I think.
Good word. I think that's exactly it. It's a good bridge, helping people through this process and how to actually manage it. Because I think you're right. I've often spoken about the change in AI and kind of the loss of jobs in the white collar worker space being similar to what happened with automation and the factories, and actually before that, what happened in the farms, in the fields when tractors came in. And it's now
Yes.
this kind of automation of life that started on the farm, went into the factory, and is now coming into the kind of the desk environment. We're going to
Yeah.
see that impact. And I think you're right, is it's about upskilling. We have to keep upskilling. Otherwise, we will be
Yes.
left behind. And we can't just say, oh, well, I'm not going to bother with AI because, yeah, I don't know how to use it. I don't care. And head in the sand kind of thing. We cannot be ostriches. You have to upscale. Otherwise, you
Yep.
might just be a statistic rather than
Yeah,
be part of it.
I couldn't agree more. I, like I said, like the change is coming and it's unfortunately just not an option to not participate in some way, and you can figure out how you want to participate. I think maybe giving people more options is a really good solution, and maybe that's a space for cyber psychologists. One example actually that I'm thinking about immediately when you were talking about the farming example is that in my undergrad, since I studied business, we did a lot of case studies on different industries, and one of them was the auto industry, which was of particular interest to me. And one thing that is lesser known probably about the auto industry and that kind of collapse is that when automation started, transforming the way the auto industry worked, a lot of our foreign competition actually invited us into their factories to teach us this new way of doing things. And we refused. Like Americans were just like, no, like we're gonna do it our way, like very, arrogant, I would say. And we sort of see where that led. And so I always have that in the back of my mind of like, well, I lived in the aftermath of that. I was the product of many generations of these kinds of workers, who my parents, experienced the collapse of that. And so I think I'm always a person who's motivated to say like, how can we give people more options? And while also, sometimes change is scary. And I think making maybe like offering people some sense of autonomy within that change is a good solution.
Yeah. One of the things that I keep on telling my friends whose children are coming up into the workforce is to think about more trade work within the trades, because that's not really going to be automated as much as white collar worker roles will be,
You're
and look
right.
at hands-on stuff. So get into the trades. Otherwise, become a cyber psychologist.
Here are your options.
Yeah, you have two options.
Right. Yeah. You're right, though. It is like
It is.
a lot of the trades are like, you're not going to automate a plumber's job. Like, it's just not going to happen. You're always going to
No.
need one. Yep.
Or even electrician, you can see some element of automation happening, but a person has to be part of that rewiring of a house thing, or laying down a house, or putting bricks on top of each other. That's going to mostly be humans for quite some time. So
You're right.
the trades or cyber psychologists, those are your two choices in life.
Choose now.
Choose now. Oh, brilliant. My final question, Louise, is do you have any particular favorite cyber psychology related book that you might normally recommend to others to read, or something that's within your specific field?
I do. I wouldn't call it cyber psychology specifically, but I'll give the name of a book that I have just not been able to forget about for 2+ years. It's by Nita Farhani. I might be mispronouncing her name, so apologies if I am. It is on the topic of cognitive liberty, and the title of her book is The Battle for Your Brain: Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology. And she speaks about the commodification of brain data. And she talks a lot about wearable. Oh yeah. Let me listen. When I first, so she also takes like a legal perspective because she's a law professor and a lawyer. The first time I read anything from her, I was like, the way I think about data, especially from wearables, is forever different. She makes so many good points and she's so intelligent. I just cannot recommend this topic of like cognitive liberty, the whole like idea of it and her perspective specifically enough. She is brilliant.
So, what does she say about wearables? Is that it kind of takes some of your cognitive brain power away, or what is her perspective, just top line?
She really gets into it. She gets into a lot of different perspectives, so I won't even begin to pretend that I'm able to summarize the whole of her perspective. But I will say one of the fascinating parts of it to me is I think she does a good job of challenging the way we think about um, how the data is being used and how valuable it is and what it could turn into, right? So if you think about something like a wearable that can track all of your different like bodily functions, how then could we eventually get into the space of like thinking or feeling? Like, is it possible that eventually we could be able to track a feeling? Because that is not that far-fetched, right? If our feelings have like physical, psychometric, if we can measure, if you have like a panic attack or a lot of these like feelings, there are biosensors that could be measuring them. And she does a really good job of laying out, that's just one part, right? Like that part enough was enough to I was like I'm in. But she does a really good job of really thinking through the whole of that and all the consequences and where that could lead and what that means for us as, you know, just kind of little worker bees, frankly, compared to these billionaire tech giants who are going to have all of this brain data. And then how are they going to use it? And how do we think they're going to use it to make money? Um, so yeah, I think she has like a couple really good examples from different countries in there of the ways that like other countries are already maybe using this data. But yeah, it was a perspective and a thought that I really had not explored when I am guilty of this too. Like I have an Apple Watch and I just very freely, very readily am like, take all of my, take my heart rate all day. Like who cares? And I think she gives this really valuable perspective of like, let's think critically about why might this data be valuable to these companies? Because really there's like a saying in marketing, like if you can't figure out what a company is selling, it's because like you're the product, basically, like they're they're selling your data. And I think more and more that's true. Like, and we do need to think critically about that. We need to think about it legally. We need to think about our own cognitive privacy and liberty. And yeah, it's fascinating. It's heavy. It's fascinating.
That book's the next on my list. I'm definitely going to put that on Audible because I found it listening to a book so much easier than reading it. But I was also thinking about that when you're saying that, because we also always talk about data privacy and us and AI being kind of mining all our data. But
Hmm.
actually, we freely use the AI that has mined all the data. So
We give
there's
it to
kind
them.
of yeah. So exactly, we give it to them or that they've already taken it. But we talk about we don't want AI to know our stuff, but we'll happily use AI and the data that they've already mined. But I was
Yes.
thinking that that's kind of an opposite to what you were saying in terms of you happily give all your data to them, but because actually there's a benefit to you for it because it helps you understand yourself. So there's a kind of a bit of a tug of war in a way in terms of my data and my privacy versus their mining of data and their profits. And it's just and we don't kind of, as individuals, sit down and work out this juxtaposition of data and our stuff and how we use it and how we
Yes.
give it away and then how we use what's already there that's already been mined from other places and we happily give it and happily take it and don't want to and then privacy and we're just a bit muddled in this space, I think, in some ways, without really thinking about the fact that we are quite muddled in this space.
Yes, it is like the definition. This is such a fascinating topic to me because it's so the cognitive dissonance I think that exists for all of us. Like there's no one thing I always say when I'm talking about these topics is like I am right there with you. Like I am in this every single day as well. Like I said, I have an Apple Watch. Like I'm using a lot of these products. I'm using Chat GPT, probably like asking questions that I'm like, should I really be asking, but I think it's fascinating because even just a few days ago, Sam Altman came out, like there was an article. I'm sure you are already know what I'm going to say, but he was like, "Hey, just so you know, like everything you say to ChatGPT can be subpoenaed. Like this is not private. There's no HIPAA happening here. This is not patient doctor. Like this is all, don't mistake what is happening here." And I write about this even in my research. One of the examples I give that I think is uh, really like a present concern for this topic is especially in the US with the Dobbs case of overturning Roe versus Wade. What is real is that we have these wearables, these trackers that can track all of these signals, bodily signals. So how far are we from being able to figure out if a woman's having a miscarriage? And to are would that can we subpoena that? Is that can that be used against someone? Like, where are the lines here? Where is the legal, like where, and I think going back to the book I was recommending, she explores that in a way that I'm like, this is missing. This is missing from the conversation of exactly like you were saying, we are so freely giving this data away or offering it up because it benefits us in some way. But I think there is a piece of this of like, well, what right do we have to privacy or what right do we have to like legal protection here? Because that is so murky right now. It just doesn't exist. And, this is a whole other topic of conversation, but to me, a big, huge gap in like the regulatory and legal and like those spaces is that a lot of the people in those spaces don't understand technology. So then they're creating laws around things they don't understand, or they're giving a lot of leeway around things that they don't understand. And it kind of leads us back to this question of like, well, we're not going to know until it happens. And then when it happens, you got to hope that, you know,
You could pull something back.
yeah, or that like they're doing the right thing of thinking about intention and how this should be used and protecting people's rights to like bodily autonomy and cognitive autonomy. Yeah, it is fascinating, endlessly fascinating.
Endlessly fascinating and such a minefield and so much research.
Yeah.
Oh, Louise, thank you so much for joining me in Confessions of a Cyber Psychologist. It was so fabulous to catch up with you. And I really look forward to chatting to you again about all of this in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.